Thank you very much. I really am honored to be here in New Jersey. I came from Long Island today with the thought that there were people in the New York area who were still interested in what happened in Honduras because people seem to have forgotten all about it. And it's a really important thing. But I can't start without also giving tribute and support in some way to the people of Haiti who are going through such a terrible, terrible calamity right now. And it's interesting because, of course, in Haiti they kidnapped their president. The United States kidnapped their president as well. So the situation there is very grave, and I just didn't want to not mention it. And also, probably at the time that I said what I was going to say, when I wrote originally to Alvin, I was thinking different things about Honduras, so I'm not going to entirely keep to what I promised, because I want to put Honduras into a larger context. So, thank you again. Honduras is a very poor country. Honduras is poor because the United States needs Honduras, as well as hundreds of other nations on earth, to be poor, so that those who own the world's wealth, bankers and big businessmen, can profit. Honduras are poor, so the ruling class can be rich. This nation of 7.8 million people was United Fruit's first banana republic. United States corporations, with the assistance of the U.S. government and military, have developed long friendships with Honduran economic oligarchies. In Honduras, about a dozen families have owned and ruled the land and its people for over 100 years. Thanks to the U.S. government. The golpe, the military coup in Honduras, that happened on June 28th last year, happened when the people of Honduras were preparing to have a non-binding vote to change their constitution. This was their legal right, and this poll called for the creation of a government which would provide better social services for the majority of the Honduran people, who are poor. The golpe government that removed Emmanuel Zelaya, a legally elected and popular president, from office, has deep roots in history and placed one of Honduras's richest men, Roberto Micheletti, in power. The golpe militaire repressed all who resisted. The country became a fascist state. When I joined a group of religious, labor union leaders, academics, community organizers, and youth activists, and traveled to Honduras last October, we saw this with our own eyes. Micheletti is still in power, and the golpistas, the coup government, with jackboots in the streets, conducted a fraud election in November to shore up their power. In the Western Hemisphere, only the United States accepted this election as legitimate. You are familiar with the School of America's Watch, right? So they tell us that the leaders of the Honduran coup were in fact trained by the SOA. They renamed it the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, but we call it the School of Assassins. SOA is a combat training school for Latin American soldiers located at Fort Benning, Georgia. Almost all the senior Honduran military officers active in the coup were graduates of the Pentagon School of the Americas. The Honduran military is trained, advised, equipped, indoctrinated, and financed by the United States government and military. The Honduran generals would never have dared to move on June 28th without consent of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA. I want to give you the names of the leaders of the June 28th military coup, because a lot of times people in the United States say whatever when they hear a name, you know. So I think it's important to hear them and maybe, you know a few, not just Micheletti. So there's a fellow whose name is General Vasquez, who trained at School of Assassins in 76 and 84. Then there is the head of the Air Force, who featured very much in the coup, General Luis Prince Suazo, and he studied at SOA in 1996. There's a SOA graduate whose name is General Juan Melgar Castro, who became the military dictator of Honduras. And in the history of Honduras, from 80 to 82, an SOA graduate, Policarpo Paz Garcia, was the fellow who ordered up the Battalion 316, which is one of the most feared death squad organizations in all of Latin America. It was founded by SOA graduates, and it was also assisted by Argentine SOA graduates. So that's how the coup was finessed, with these characters behind the figurehead non-military man, Roberto Micheletti. But was the United States culpable? Good question. When Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Zelaya on June 2nd, she said that the United States thought Zelaya's plans for reforming the Constitution was a bad idea. The United States ambassador to Honduras held discussions with military officials where, this is a quote from the New York Times, there was talk of how they might remove the president from office, how he could be arrested, and under whose authority they could do that. After the coup, Micheletti's public relations media campaign, which justified and legitimized the coup, was handled by Lanny Davis, Bill Clinton's personal lawyer. The coup in Honduras is a story of corruption and deception. The New York Times called, it was like a media campaign, right? So the New York Times called Honduran President Zelaya a threat to democracy, since he challenges, this is a quote from the Times, this is how you get to be a threat. He challenged the most powerful business and political forces in the country. Sounds pretty scary to me. Let's go for threats. Washington Post reported 2 days following the coup on June 28th that when Hillary was asked if it was a U.S. priority to see Zelaya reinstated, she responded, "We haven't laid out any demands that we're insisting on because we're working with others on behalf of our ultimate objectives." The ultimate objectives have become clear. The U.S. pressed for elections to legitimize the coup. After the November 29th elections, which were mainly boycotted by the people, Hugo Lorenz, Obama's ambassador, called them a great celebration of democracy. Louis Anselm, Obama's representative to the OAS, told Latin Americans to recognize the election results and join the United States, quote, in the real world, not in the world of magical realism. The United States government needs Honduras to guarantee ongoing military access to Honduras's Palmerola Air Base, the largest air base in Central America. Together with the 7 military bases the United States is constructing in Colombia, the U.S. objective is a historical objective. The Pentagon wants to dominate Latin America and reverse advances by social movements and progressive governments. The U.S. has had one way of ensuring its hegemony over Latin America: military might. I worked in solidarity with the peoples of Central America in the 1980s, and at the time we called Honduras the USS Honduras. Revolutionaries in Honduras were murdered thanks to SOA-trained Policarpo Paz Garcia's Battalion 316, and the U.S. kept tight control over Honduras. The U.S. launched wars against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and the FMLN in El Salvador from their Palmerola Air Force Base. The same base, by the way, to which the Honduran military brought President Zelaya the night he was kidnapped on the 28th of June. The USS Honduras meant that the U.S. established 18 military bases in the country, stationed 10,000 U.S. troops there, and also provided the Honduran armed forces with $100 million. It's still the USS Honduras. Over the past 10 years, the United States has delivered $18.4 million in weapons and defense articles to Honduras through the Foreign Military Sales Program, with foreign military financing totaling $7.3 million between 2003 and today. And at the same time, they did an international military education and training program, which came to $14.8 million. It was in 1982 that the Honduran Constitution was written, providing the right of the Honduran upper class, the military, and the U.S. government and economic entities to rule. It was this Constitution the people of Honduras wanted to change last year in the Constituyente, to change the statutes mandating permanent poverty and landlessness for the majority of Hondurans. Members of the oligarchy felt that the reopening of the Constitution could represent a real threat to their stranglehold on wealth and power. Zelaya vowed to pursue the Constituyente since the people asked for it. Polls before the referendum showed overwhelming support for the changes. So, the morning that the first non-binding poll was supposed to happen, Zelaya was abducted by the military and flown to Costa Rica.